Deep in the heart of South America, where the Andes Mountains meet the Amazon rainforest, lies a legend so powerful that it drove men to madness, launched 1,000 expeditions, and changed the course of history forever. For over 500 years, the name El Dorado has captured human imagination like few other legends. But here's what will blow your mind. El Dorado was never a city at all. The true story behind this golden legend is far more incredible, more tragic, and more revealing about human nature than any treasure map could ever be. We're talking about a sacred ritual that became a Spanish obsession, a quest that consumed lives and fortunes, and a mystery that still draws adventurers into the deepest jungles of Colombia today. Welcome to History Unleashed, where we uncover the truth behind the world's greatest mysteries and legends. I'm your host, and today we're embarking on an epic journey into one of history's most enduring and misunderstood quests, the search for El Dorado. From ancient Muisca ceremonies on sacred lakes to Spanish conquistadors lost in the Amazon, from scientific expeditions to modern treasure hunters, we'll explore every twist and turn of this golden obsession. If you're ready to discover the shocking truth behind one of history's greatest treasure hunts, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because what we're about to uncover will completely change how you think about exploration, greed, and the price of obsession. Trust me, by the end of this investigation, you'll understand why El Dorado became more than a legend. It became a curse that claimed thousands of lives and reshaped an entire continent. So grab your machete and your sense of adventure. We're heading into the jungle to uncover the truth about the city that never was, but whose legend became more real than reality itself. In the emerald highlands of what is now Colombia, where crystalline lakes reflect snow-capped Andean peaks and morning mists rise like the breath of sleeping gods, the Muisca people had developed one of South America's most sophisticated civilizations long before Spanish boots ever touched American soil. But it wasn't their advanced agriculture, their complex political structures, or their masterful gold work that would make them legendary. It was a sacred ceremony so magnificent, so rich in symbolism and precious metal, that it would spawn the greatest treasure hunt in human history. The true El Dorado was not a place, but a person. El Hombre Dorado, the Golden Man. This was the title given to the ruler of the Muisca Confederacy who, upon ascending to leadership, would undergo a ritual so extraordinary that Spanish conquistadors could barely believe the accounts when they first heard them whispered in jungle camps and colonial halls. The ceremony took place at Lake Guatavita, a perfectly circular crater lake nestled high in the Cordillera Oriental at over 3,000 meters above sea level. A body of water so pristine and mystical that the Muisca considered it a gateway between the earthly realm and the domain of their gods. The ritual itself was a masterpiece of spiritual theater and political symbolism that demonstrated the wealth, power, and sophisticated religious beliefs of the Muisca people. When a new leader was chosen, he would spend months in preparation, fasting and purifying himself in sacred caves while priests performed elaborate ceremonies to ensure his worthiness to serve as intermediary between the human and divine worlds. The preparation was not just physical but deeply spiritual, transforming the man from an ordinary human being into a sacred vessel capable of communicating with the gods who controlled rain, fertility, and the prosperity of his people. On the appointed day, as dawn broke over the mountain peaks and mist began to rise from the sacred lake, the entire community would gather along the shores of Guatavita to witness the transformation of their new leader. The future ruler would be stripped naked and covered from head to toe in a sticky resin, then coated with gold dust until he appeared to be made of pure gold, glowing like the sun god himself in the early morning light. This wasn't merely decoration. It was a transformation that symbolized the ruler's role as the earthly embodiment of celestial power. But the Golden Man was not alone in this ceremony. The raft that would carry him to the center of the lake was itself a work of art, crafted from carefully woven reeds and decorated with golden ornaments that caught and reflected the sunlight as it moved across the water. Accompanying the golden ruler were his most trusted advisors and priests, also adorned with gold and precious ornaments, carrying offerings of emeralds, gold figures, and other sacred objects that would be presented to the gods dwelling beneath the lake's surface. The journey to the center of Lake Guatavita was conducted in absolute silence, broken only by the gentle splash of paddles and the soft chanting of priests who recited ancient prayers and invocations. As the raft reached the lake's deepest point, the ceremony reached its climax. The golden man would stand, raise his arms to the sky in supplication to the sun god, and then dive into the sacred waters, washing away the gold dust in an act of purification and rebirth that symbolized his transformation from ordinary human to divine ruler. But the gold dust was only the beginning of the offerings made to the lake gods. The priests and nobles on the raft would throw their precious cargo into the water. Intricately crafted golden figures of animals and humans, emeralds from the sacred mines, cotton textiles woven with golden threads, and other treasures that represented the wealth and devotion of the Muisca people. These weren't mere payments or bribes to the gods, but sacred offerings that maintained the cosmic balance between human society and natural forces. Here's something that reveals the sophisticated understanding of leadership and power that existed in pre-Columbian America. From which country are you watching this video? Because cultures around the world have developed elaborate rituals for legitimizing political authority and connecting rulers with spiritual power. What ceremonies or traditions does your culture have for marking important transitions or connecting leaders with higher authority? Drop your country in the comments and share what you know about your culture's approach to ritual and leadership. I'm fascinated by how different societies have used ceremony to create meaning and maintain social order. The significance of water in Muisca cosmology cannot be overstated. Like many indigenous American cultures, the Muisca understood water as the fundamental source of life, fertility, and spiritual power. Lakes, rivers, and springs, the significance of water in Muisca cosmology cannot be overstated. Like many indigenous American cultures, the Muisca understood water as the fundamental source of life, fertility, and spiritual power. Lakes, rivers, and springs were not just geographical features, but sacred spaces where the boundaries between different worlds became permeable, allowing communication between humans and gods. Lake Guatavita, with its perfect circular shape and mysterious depths, was the most sacred of these spaces, a natural temple where the most important spiritual and political ceremonies were conducted. The golden offerings at Guatavita served multiple functions beyond their obvious religious significance. They represented the economic power of the Muisca Confederation, which controlled some of the richest gold and emerald deposits in South America. The ceremony demonstrated to neighboring peoples that the Muisca possessed not only material wealth, but also the spiritual authority to offer such treasures to the gods. The ritual also reinforced social hierarchy within Muisca society, as participation in the ceremony was limited to the highest-ranking nobles and priests. The frequency of these ceremonies varied according to different historical accounts, with some suggesting they occurred only when new rulers took power, while others indicate they may have been performed annually or during times of crisis when the community needed to renew its relationship with the gods. What is certain is that the ceremonies continued for centuries, with each generation of Muisca leaders adding their own golden offerings to the sacred lake's bottom, gradually creating an underwater treasure trove that would eventually capture the imagination of Spanish conquistadors. The Muisca understanding of gold was fundamentally different from European concepts of precious metals as stores of economic value. For the Muisca, gold was sacred not because of its monetary worth, but because of its symbolic connection to the sun, the most powerful deity in their pantheon. Gold's resistance to tarnish and its brilliant luster made it the perfect material for representing divine power and eternal truth. When Muisca artisans created golden objects, they weren't making jewelry or currency, but sacred art that connected the physical world with spiritual realities. The Spanish arrival in Muisca territory in the 1530s marked the beginning of the end for these ancient ceremonies, but also the transformation of El Dorado from a specific person and ritual into a general legend about cities of gold waiting to be discovered somewhere in the South American wilderness. The conquistadors who first heard accounts of the Golden Man ceremony couldn't believe that such wealth would simply be thrown into a lake as religious offering. Their European minds, conditioned to think of gold as the ultimate store of value, couldn't comprehend a culture that would waste such treasures on spiritual purposes. The tragic irony is that by the time Spanish expeditions reached Lake Guatavita, the ceremonies had already ceased, ended by the disruption of conquest and the destruction of Muisca political and religious institutions. The lake that had once been the center of one of South America's most magnificent rituals became a symbol of lost wealth and mysterious treasure, launching expeditions that would search for El Dorado in every corner of the continent except the one place where it had actually existed. The transformation of El Dorado from a sacred Muisca ritual into a Spanish obsession represents one of history's most dramatic cultural misunderstandings, revealing the profound differences between indigenous and European concepts of wealth, power, and the relationship between humans and the natural world. When Spanish conquistadors first heard fragmented accounts of the Golden Man ceremony, they interpreted these stories through the lens of their own cultural assumptions and desires, creating a legend that bore little resemblance to the original reality but would drive European exploration and exploitation of South America for centuries. The Spanish conquest of the Americas was motivated by what historians call the 3 Gs: gold, glory, and gospel. But it was gold that captured the imagination most powerfully. The conquistadors who arrived in the New World had witnessed the incredible wealth extracted from Mexico and Peru, where Aztec and Inca civilizations had accumulated vast treasures of precious metals that were shipped back to Spain in quantities that revolutionized the European economy. When rumors began circulating about an even richer land somewhere in the northern regions of South America, where a king made entirely of gold performed ceremonies on a lake filled with treasure, it seemed like the ultimate prize was waiting to be claimed. The first documented reference to El Dorado in Spanish colonial records appeared around 1541, in accounts written by conquistadors who had participated in expeditions into the Colombian highlands. These early reports described the Muisca ceremony with reasonable accuracy, but they were quickly embellished and distorted as the stories spread through colonial society. Each retelling added new details. The lake became larger, the gold more abundant, the ceremony more frequent, and gradually the focus shifted from a ritual performed by one group of indigenous people to a general belief that somewhere in the South American interior lay cities built entirely of gold. Sebastián de Belalcázar, one of the conquistadors who had participated in the conquest of Peru, became one of the first Europeans to actively search for El Dorado based on these early reports. In 1536, he launched an expedition northward from Peru into what is now Colombia, following indigenous trade routes and questioning every native group he encountered about golden cities and wealthy kingdoms. Belalcázar's expedition established the pattern that would be followed by dozens of subsequent El Dorado seekers: brutal forced marches through impossible terrain, the systematic torture and murder of indigenous guides and informants, and the gradual transformation of rational exploration into obsessive quest. The German exploration of Venezuela added another dimension to the El Dorado legend, and demonstrated how international competition for New World riches intensified the search for mythical golden cities. Charles V of Spain had granted the German banking house of Welser the right to colonize and exploit Venezuela in exchange for loans needed to finance his European wars. The German agents who arrived in Venezuela were even more ruthless than their Spanish counterparts, viewing the colony purely as a business investment that needed to generate immediate returns. Nicolas Federmann and Georg Hohermuth von Speyer led German expeditions deep into the Venezuelan interior during the 1530s and 1540s, following river systems and indigenous trails in search of El Dorado, while establishing a brutal pattern of exploitation that would characterize European exploration of the Orinoco Basin for centuries. These German expeditions contributed significantly to the geographical expansion of El Dorado legends as they explored regions far from the original Muisca homeland and interpreted every rumor of wealth or every golden ornament they encountered as evidence that the great prize was just beyond the next mountain range. Gonzalo Pizarro's expedition of 1541 to 1542 represents perhaps the most tragic and revealing example of how El Dorado obsession could drive rational men to destruction. Pizarro, brother of the famous conqueror of Peru, organized what was supposed to be a systematic exploration of the Amazon basin in search of both El Dorado and the legendary Cinnamon Country, another mythical land of wealth that Spanish colonial imagination had placed somewhere in the South American interior. The expedition began with over 4,000 men, including Spanish soldiers, indigenous guides, slaves, and support personnel, making it one of the largest exploration forces ever assembled in the Americas. The journey became a nightmare of starvation, disease, hostile indigenous groups, and impossible terrain that claimed the lives of thousands of participants and achieved none of its objectives except to demonstrate the limits of human endurance and the power of obsession to override rational judgment. Francisco Orellana's decision, the attempt to drain Lake Guatavita, represents one of history's most ambitious and revealing treasure hunting endeavors, demonstrating both the incredible persistence of El Dorado legends and the lengths to which human greed and determination could drive technological innovation and physical endurance. This extraordinary engineering project, spanning several centuries and involving multiple attempts by different groups, transformed the sacred Muisca Lake into one of the most famous archaeological sites in the Americas, while providing tantalizing evidence that the original El Dorado ceremonies had indeed deposited vast quantities of gold beneath the pristine waters. The first serious attempt to recover the legendary treasures of Lake Guatavita began in 1545, just a few years after Spanish conquistadors had established control over Muisca territory and learned the true story of the Golden Man ceremonies. A Spanish businessman named Hernán Pérez de Quesada, brother of the conquistador who had conquered the Muisca, organized an expedition to drain the lake using indigenous labor and primitive technology that seems almost impossible by modern standards, but achieved remarkable results through sheer determination and ruthless exploitation. Quesada's method involved cutting a notch in the lowest point of the lake's rim and organizing hundreds of indigenous workers into bucket brigades that would bail out water faster than it could flow back through the drainage channel. The physical demands of this operation were enormous, requiring workers to labor for months in the frigid mountain air at over 3,000 meters elevation, passing leather buckets and clay pots in endless chains while Spanish overseers drove them to maintain the back-breaking pace necessary to lower the water level faster than natural seepage could refill it. The results of this first drainage attempt exceeded the wildest expectations of the Spanish organizers and provided dramatic confirmation that the Muisca ceremonies had indeed deposited incredible wealth in the lake's depths. As the water level dropped, revealing muddy banks that had been submerged for centuries, workers began finding golden objects of extraordinary beauty and craftsmanship. The recovered artifacts included golden figurines depicting humans and animals, elaborate ornaments that had adorned Muisca nobles, emeralds of exceptional quality and size, and ceremonial objects whose artistic sophistication challenged European assumptions about indigenous American capabilities. The total value of gold and emeralds recovered from Quesada's partial drainage was estimated at over 3,000 pesos de oro, an enormous sum that represented several years' income for wealthy Spanish colonists, and confirmed that Lake Guatavita contained treasures that justified the incredible effort required to extract them. However, the primitive drainage techniques of the 16th century could only lower the lake level by a few meters, leaving the deepest and potentially richest areas still submerged and tantalizingly out of reach. The success of Quesada's operation sparked renewed interest in Lake Guatavita that persisted for centuries, with each generation of treasure hunters developing new theories and techniques for accessing the submerged wealth that obviously lay in the lake's depths. The stories of golden objects recovered from the muddy shores became part of El Dorado folklore, providing concrete evidence that supported the broader legends while also demonstrating that systematic treasure hunting could produce genuine results for those willing to invest the necessary resources and effort. The most ambitious and technologically sophisticated attempt to drain Lake Guatavita occurred in 1580. When Antonio de Sepúlveda obtained official permission from Spanish colonial authorities to organize a comprehensive drainage operation, using advanced engineering techniques and a much larger workforce than previous attempts. Sepúlveda's operation represented a massive colonial undertaking that employed hundreds of workers for over a year, and used innovative tunneling techniques to create a more effective drainage system that could lower the lake level far more dramatically than bucket brigades. Sepúlveda's engineers cut a deep channel through the rock rim of the lake and constructed an elaborate tunnel system designed to carry away water more efficiently than surface drainage could achieve. The engineering challenges were enormous, requiring workers to blast through solid rock using primitive explosives, shore up tunnels to prevent collapse, and coordinate a complex construction project in one of the most challenging environments imaginable. The operation consumed vast resources and took far longer than originally planned, but eventually succeeded in lowering the lake level by over 20 meters and exposing areas of the lake bottom that had never been seen since the lake's formation. The treasures recovered from Sepúlveda's drainage operation confirmed and exceeded the most optimistic projections about Lake Guatavita's archaeological wealth. Workers found thousands of golden objects, including elaborate ceremonial pieces that demonstrated the incredible skill of Muisca metalworkers, emeralds of exceptional quality, and artifacts that provided unprecedented insights into pre-Columbian indigenous culture and religious practices. The recovered gold was estimated to be worth over 12,000 pesos de oro, making the operation one of the most successful treasure hunting ventures in colonial American history. However, the success of Sepúlveda's drainage was ultimately limited by the same technological constraints that had affected earlier attempts. Even with advanced tunneling techniques, the drainage system could not overcome the natural water sources that fed the lake, and maintaining the lower water level required constant pumping and maintenance that eventually became economically unsustainable. When the operation was finally abandoned due to cost overruns and technical difficulties, the lake gradually refilled, once again protecting its remaining treasures beneath meters of dark water. Here's something that demonstrates the incredible persistence of treasure hunting throughout human history. From which country are you watching this? Because every culture has stories of people who devoted their lives and fortunes to searching for hidden wealth, sometimes with dramatic success, but more often with tragic consequences. What famous treasure hunting stories do you know from your region's history? Share your thoughts in the comments about what drives people to such extreme lengths in pursuit of legendary riches. The 19th and early 20th centuries saw renewed international interest in Lake Guatavita as technological advances made more sophisticated drainage operations seem possible. European and American investors formed companies specifically dedicated to recovering the lake's treasures, using modern engineering equipment and techniques that previous generations of treasure hunters could never have imagined. These operations attracted international attention and represented some of the earliest examples of scientific archaeology being applied to New World indigenous sites. The most famous and ultimately tragic modern attempt to drain Lake Guatavita occurred in 1965, when a British company called Contractors Limited obtained permission from the Colombian government to conduct a comprehensive drainage and archaeological survey of the lake. This operation used modern pumping equipment, underwater excavation techniques, and scientific documentation methods that should have produced definitive results about the lake's remaining archaeological wealth. The 1965 operation initially appeared successful, managing to lower the water level significantly and recover numerous artifacts that were carefully cataloged and studied by professional archaeologists. However, the project was plagued by technical difficulties, cost overruns, and political complications that eventually forced its abandonment before the deepest areas of the lake could be systematically explored. The operation's failure represented not just another unsuccessful treasure hunt, but the end of an era, as growing archaeological and cultural awareness made it increasingly unlikely that future large-scale drainage operations would be permitted. The transformation of Lake Guatavita from active treasure hunting site to protected archaeological preserve reflects broader changes in how modern societies approach indigenous cultural heritage and historical sites. The Colombian government's decision to declare the lake a protected cultural monument acknowledges both its archaeological significance and its continuing sacred importance to indigenous communities, who consider it a symbol of their ancestors' spiritual beliefs and cultural achievements. The scientific study of artifacts recovered from Lake Guatavita has provided unprecedented insights into Muisca civilization and pre-Columbian indigenous culture more generally. The golden objects found in the lake demonstrate sophisticated metallurgical techniques, complex religious symbolism, and artistic achievements that challenge European assumptions about the capabilities of indigenous American societies. The emeralds recovered from the lake represent some of the finest examples of pre-Columbian gem cutting and demonstrate the extensive trade networks that connected different regions of ancient South America. The pursuit of El Dorado generated some of the most extraordinary and tragic expeditions in the history of human exploration, transforming rational men into obsessed fanatics who would sacrifice everything: their fortunes, their followers, their sanity, and ultimately their lives, in pursuit of a dream that grew more impossible with each failed attempt. These expeditions reveal the dark side of human ambition and the terrible price that entire societies paid for the European obsession with New World gold that drove exploration far beyond the boundaries of reason or survival. Sir Walter Raleigh's expeditions to the Orinoco River represent perhaps the most famous and ultimately tragic example of how El Dorado obsession could destroy even the most accomplished and intelligent individuals. Raleigh, one of England's most celebrated courtiers, explorers, and writers, became convinced during his imprisonment in the Tower of London that discovering El Dorado would restore his fortune and reputation while providing England with the wealth needed to challenge Spanish dominance in the Americas. His belief in the Golden City was based on a combination of indigenous accounts, Spanish colonial reports, and his own misinterpretation of geographical evidence that led him to conclude that El Dorado lay somewhere along the Orinoco River in what is now Venezuela. Raleigh's first expedition to Guyana in 1595 was organized with meticulous planning and equipped with the best maps, supplies, and personnel that Elizabethan England could provide. The expedition included experienced sailors, soldiers, and gentlemen adventurers who shared Raleigh's confidence that systematic exploration of the Orinoco Basin would locate the golden city that had eluded Spanish conquistadors for decades. Raleigh's account of this expedition, published as The Discovery of the Large, Rich, and Beautiful Empire of Guyana, became one of the most influential exploration narratives of the 16th century and convinced thousands of Europeans that El Dorado was not only real, but within reach of a well-organized expedition. The reality of Raleigh's Orinoco exploration was far different from his published accounts. The expedition faced all the traditional challenges of tropical exploration: hostile indigenous groups, impossible terrain, disease, starvation, and the psychological breakdown that occurred when civilized men found themselves in environments that challenged every assumption about human survival and social organization. Raleigh's party never found any cities of gold, but they did encounter indigenous groups who told them stories about golden kingdoms that lay just beyond the next set of rapids or mountain range, always tantalizingly out of reach but close enough to justify continuing the search. The failure of Raleigh's first expedition did nothing to diminish his belief in El Dorado, but instead convinced him that the Golden City existed in regions he hadn't yet explored, and that future expeditions with better preparation and more resources would succeed where his first attempt had failed. This psychological pattern, the interpretation of failure as evidence that success was imminent, characterized virtually every El Dorado expedition and explains how rational people could continue pursuing an impossible goal despite overwhelming evidence that it didn't exist. Raleigh's second and final expedition to the Orinoco in 1617 was launched under far more difficult circumstances, as he was by then an old man released from prison on the condition that his exploration would discover genuine wealth for the English crown without provoking war with Spain. This expedition was undermanned, poorly supplied, and led by a man whose obsession with El Dorado had overcome his judgment and experience. The tragic results included the death of Raleigh's son Walter in a skirmish with Spanish forces, the complete failure to find any golden cities, and Raleigh's own execution upon his return to England when King James I decided that the expedition's failures and complications with Spain required a scapegoat. The German expeditions into the Venezuelan interior during the 16th century demonstrated how El Dorado obsession could drive exploration to the very limits of human endurance and beyond. Philip von Hutten's expedition of 1541 to 1546 represents one of the most extraordinary journeys in the history of exploration, covering thousands of miles through some of the most challenging terrain in South America, while maintaining the systematic documentation and discipline that characterized German colonial administration, even under impossible conditions. Von Hutten's expedition began with over 300 men and followed indigenous trade routes deep into the Llanos region of Venezuela and Colombia, searching for the golden city that Spanish expeditions had failed to locate despite decades of effort. The journey became an epic of survival that tested every aspect of human physical. Von Hutten's expedition began with over 300 men, and followed indigenous trade routes deep into the Llanos region of Venezuela and Colombia, searching for the golden city that Spanish expeditions had failed to locate despite decades of effort. The journey became an epic of survival that tested every aspect of human physical and psychological endurance. As the expedition encountered hostile indigenous groups, navigated treacherous river systems, crossed mountain ranges that challenged the limits of human survival, and gradually disintegrated through disease, starvation, and the constant stress of maintaining military discipline in an environment that seemed designed to destroy European concepts of order and civilization. The psychological transformation of expedition members during prolonged El Dorado searches reveals important insights into human behavior under extreme stress and the ways that shared obsessions could maintain group cohesion even when rational analysis would have demanded abandonment of impossible goals. Expedition survivors consistently reported that the search for El Dorado became more important than survival itself, as the goal took on quasi-religious significance that transcended practical considerations about food, safety, or the likelihood of success. Here's something that reveals the incredible power of shared obsessions to override individual survival instincts. From which country are you watching this? Because history is full of examples where groups of people pursued impossible goals despite overwhelming evidence that they should abandon their quests. What examples can you think of from your culture or region where collective obsession led people to take extreme risks or make terrible sacrifices? Share your thoughts in the comments about what drives human beings to such extremes in pursuit of dreams that may be impossible. The role of indigenous guides and informants in El Dorado expeditions reveals the complex dynamics of cultural interaction, resistance, and survival that characterized the colonial encounter in South America. Many indigenous groups discovered that European obsession with gold could be manipulated to protect their own communities by directing expeditions away from their territories and toward the lands of their enemies, or into uninhabited regions where the Europeans might die of natural causes without requiring direct military confrontation. The phenomenon of El Dorado fever that affected Spanish colonial society demonstrates how powerful myths could reshape entire economies and social structures around the pursuit of impossible goals. Colonial cities like Bogotá, Caracas, and Quito became organizing centers for El Dorado expeditions, with merchants, officials, and adventurers forming companies and partnerships designed to finance exploration ventures that promised incredible returns but usually delivered only bankruptcy and death. The environmental impact of El Dorado expeditions was substantial and lasting, as European exploration parties introduced new diseases to indigenous populations, disrupted traditional trade networks and territorial arrangements, and established patterns of resource exploitation that would characterize European colonial relationships with South American ecosystems for centuries. The search for El Dorado often served as justification for broader patterns of territorial conquest and indigenous displacement that far exceeded the immediate goals of finding golden cities. The technological innovations developed for El Dorado expeditions contributed to advances in navigation, tropical medicine, and survival techniques that would benefit future exploration and scientific research. The detailed maps produced by expedition members, The ethnographic observations of indigenous cultures and the natural history collections assembled during these journeys provided valuable scientific knowledge even when the primary goals of finding golden cities were never achieved. The literary and cultural impact of El Dorado expeditions extended far beyond their immediate historical consequences, as expedition accounts and survival narratives became some of the most widely read and influential exploration literature of the early modern period. These accounts shaped European perceptions of South America and indigenous peoples while also contributing to broader cultural myths about the New World as a place where European dreams of wealth and transformation could be realized through sufficient courage and determination. The gradual recognition that El Dorado expeditions were exercises in futility rather than legitimate exploration represented a significant shift in European colonial attitudes toward the Americas, as practical concerns about trade, agriculture, and territorial administration gradually replaced fantastic dreams about cities of gold. This transition marked the end of the heroic age of exploration and the beginning of more systematic and sustained. The transformation of El Dorado from mythical quest to scientific investigation represents one of the most significant shifts in how human societies approach exploration and discovery, marking the transition from medieval patterns of treasure hunting to modern methodologies based on systematic research, archaeological evidence, and respect for indigenous cultural heritage. This evolution reflects broader changes in European intellectual culture during the Enlightenment and the emergence of scientific disciplines that would revolutionize human understanding of history, geography, and cultural development. Alexander von Humboldt's scientific expeditions to South America between 1799 and 1804 established new standards for systematic exploration that emphasized careful observation, accurate measurement, and comprehensive documentation of natural and cultural phenomena rather than the pursuit of immediate material gain. Humboldt's approach to investigating El Dorado legends combined skeptical analysis of historical sources with direct field research that sought to understand the geographical and cultural contexts that had given rise to these persistent stories. Humboldt's investigation of Lake Guatavita and the surrounding Muisca territory represented the first truly scientific approach to the El Dorado phenomenon. Rather than attempting to drain the lake or search for golden cities, Humboldt focused on understanding the environmental conditions that had shaped Muisca culture. The technological capabilities that had enabled their sophisticated gold working, and the social and religious factors that had motivated the ceremonial offerings that Spanish conquistadors had interpreted as evidence of unlimited wealth. The German scientists' careful ethnographic work with surviving indigenous communities provided crucial insights into the original meaning and significance of the El Dorado ceremonies that had been lost or distorted in Spanish colonial accounts. Humboldt learned that the Muisca understanding of gold as sacred material connected to solar worship was fundamentally different from European concepts of precious metals as economic commodities, and that the lake offerings represented sophisticated religious practices rather than wasteful disposal of valuable resources. Humboldt's scientific approach to El Dorado investigation established methodological principles that would guide subsequent research for centuries. He emphasized the importance of understanding indigenous perspectives on their own cultural practices, the need for accurate geographical and environmental data to interpret historical accounts, and the value of systematic comparison between different cultural traditions to identify common patterns and unique developments. The emergence of professional archaeology as a scientific discipline during the 19th century provided new tools and perspectives for investigating El Dorado legends based on material evidence rather than speculative interpretation of historical sources. Archaeological excavations in Muisca territory revealed the sophisticated material culture that had supported the original El Dorado ceremonies, while also demonstrating the extent to which Spanish colonization had disrupted and destroyed indigenous social and religious institutions. The discovery and scientific analysis of the Muisca raft, a golden artifact recovered from Lake Ciecha in 1969, provided dramatic confirmation of the historical reality behind El Dorado legends, while also demonstrating the artistic and technological sophistication of pre-Columbian indigenous cultures. This remarkable artifact, which depicts the El Dorado ceremony in exquisite detail, shows a central figure covered in gold surrounded by attendants on a ceremonial raft, providing visual evidence that corroborates the most important elements of Spanish colonial accounts. The scientific study of the Muisca raft using modern analytical techniques revealed sophisticated metallurgical knowledge that challenged European assumptions about indigenous technological capabilities. The artifact was created using the lost wax casting technique with precision that rivals the finest European gold work of the same period, and incorporates design elements that demonstrate deep understanding of both artistic composition and religious symbolism. The development of underwater archaeology techniques during the 20th century opened new possibilities for scientific investigation of Lake Guatavita and other sites associated with El Dorado legends. These methods allowed researchers to study submerged cultural deposits without the destructive drainage operations that had characterized earlier treasure hunting efforts, providing more complete and contextually accurate information about Muisca ceremonial practices. Modern scientific analysis of artifacts recovered from Lake Guatavita has revealed the incredible diversity and sophistication of objects that were offered during Modern scientific analysis of artifacts recovered from Lake Guatavita has revealed the incredible diversity and sophistication of objects that were offered during El Dorado ceremonies. These include not only golden figurines and ornaments, but also ceramic vessels, textile fragments, wooden objects, and organic materials that provide comprehensive insights into Muisca material culture and religious practices that had been invisible to earlier treasure hunters focused primarily on precious metals. Here's something that demonstrates how scientific methods can reveal truths that treasure hunting could never discover. From which country are you watching this? Because every region has examples of how modern archaeology and scientific analysis have transformed our understanding of ancient cultures, often revealing sophistication and achievements that earlier explorers completely missed. What archaeological discoveries from your area have challenged previous assumptions about ancient peoples? Share your insights in the comments. The interdisciplinary approach that characterizes modern El Dorado research combines archaeology, ethnography, environmental science, and historical analysis to create comprehensive understanding of the cultural and natural contexts that produced these legendary ceremonies. This methodology recognizes that indigenous cultures develop sophisticated relationships with their environments that can only be understood through careful study of both human activities and natural systems. The role of indigenous communities in contemporary El Dorado research represents a significant shift from the colonial patterns of investigation that had characterized earlier studies. Modern researchers work collaboratively with Muisca descendants and other indigenous groups to ensure that scientific investigation respects cultural sensitivities, while also contributing to broader understanding of pre-Columbian American civilizations. The environmental archaeology techniques used in modern El Dorado research have revealed crucial information about the ecological conditions that supported Muisca civilization and shaped their cultural practices. Analysis of pollen, sediment cores, and other environmental indicators shows that the Muisca developed their ceremonial traditions in response to specific climatic and geographical conditions that influenced their agricultural practices, population distribution, and relationship with sacred landscapes. The digital documentation and preservation technologies now available to El Dorado researchers ensure that archaeological discoveries can be studied by future generations without further damage to fragile cultural sites. Three-dimensional scanning, digital mapping, and virtual reality techniques allow scientists to create detailed records of artifacts and sites that can be analyzed and shared globally while minimizing physical impact on culturally sensitive locations. The global collaborative networks that characterize modern El Dorado research demonstrate how scientific investigation can transcend national boundaries and cultural differences to create shared understanding of human cultural achievement. International teams of researchers from multiple countries work together to study Muisca culture and related phenomena, contributing to broader understanding of indigenous American civilizations and their continuing relevance for contemporary societies. The educational applications of scientific El Dorado research have transformed these investigations from specialized academic studies into resources for public understanding of indigenous cultures and the importance of cultural preservation. Museums, educational programs, and public outreach initiatives use El Dorado research to teach broader audiences about pre-Columbian American achievements, while also promoting respect for indigenous cultural heritage and continuing communities. The persistence of El Dorado treasure hunting into the modern era demonstrates the enduring power of golden legends to capture human imagination and override rational analysis, even in an age of scientific archaeology and cultural awareness that should have definitively settled questions about the historical reality behind these ancient stories. Contemporary treasure hunters combine modern technology with age-old dreams of discovering hidden wealth, creating a complex phenomenon that reveals both the continuing appeal of adventure and the problematic relationship between individual ambition and cultural preservation. The development of metal detection technology, underwater exploration equipment, and satellite imagery has given modern treasure hunters capabilities that Spanish conquistadors could never have imagined. Yet these technological advantages have not led to the discovery of any new golden cities or major treasure deposits that would justify the continued investment of time and resources in El Dorado searches. Instead, modern technology has primarily served to demonstrate the thoroughness with which earlier generations of treasure hunters had already explored the most obvious potential locations. Reality television shows focused on treasure hunting have brought El Dorado legends to global audiences, while also perpetuating many of the misconceptions and cultural insensitivities that have characterized treasure hunting throughout its history. These programs typically emphasize the excitement of discovery and the potential for finding enormous wealth while downplaying or ignoring the archaeological context, cultural significance, and environmental impact of treasure hunting activities. The legal and ethical challenges surrounding modern El Dorado treasure hunting reflect broader tensions between individual property rights, national cultural heritage protection, and indigenous community interests that have become increasingly complex as awareness of cultural preservation issues has grown. Most countries where El Dorado legends originated have developed strict regulations governing archaeological exploration and artifact removal, making legal treasure hunting much more difficult than in previous centuries. The economic impact of modern El Dorado tourism demonstrates how legends can generate substantial revenue even when the original treasures remain elusive or inaccessible. Tourist destinations like Lake Guatavita, the Gold Museum in Bogotá, and various sites associated with historical El Dorado expeditions attract hundreds of thousands of visitors annually, creating legitimate economic benefits for local communities while also raising awareness about indigenous cultural achievements. The role of local communities in contemporary El Dorado treasure hunting varies significantly depending on regional economic conditions, legal frameworks, and cultural attitudes toward archaeological heritage. In some areas, local people participate in informal treasure hunting activities that supplement their incomes while potentially damaging important archaeological sites. In other regions, communities have become active protectors of cultural heritage sites and work with government agencies to prevent unauthorized treasure hunting. The environmental impact of modern treasure hunting technology can be far more destructive than the primitive methods used by earlier generations of El Dorado seekers. Heavy machinery, chemical processing equipment, and large-scale excavation techniques can cause irreversible damage to fragile ecosystems and archaeological sites, while the remote locations favored by treasure hunters often lack the regulatory oversight necessary to prevent environmental destruction. The psychological profiles of contemporary treasure hunters reveal many of the same motivations and personality characteristics that drove historical El Dorado expeditions, including the combination of adventure-seeking, risk-taking, and optimism that allows people to persist in pursuing unlikely goals despite repeated disappointments. Modern treasure hunters often display sophisticated knowledge of historical sources and archaeological techniques while maintaining beliefs about potential discoveries that professional archaeologists consider unrealistic. The internet and social media have created new communities of El Dorado enthusiasts who share information, theories, and experiences related to treasure hunting activities. These online networks can provide valuable support and resources for individual treasure hunters while also spreading misinformation and encouraging activities that may be illegal or culturally inappropriate. Here's something that reveals how modern technology can both help and hinder our understanding of historical mysteries. From which country are you watching this? Because every culture now deals with the tension between preserving cultural heritage and allowing exploration or development activities. Here's something that reveals how modern technology can both help and hinder our understanding of historical mysteries. From which country are you watching this? Because every culture now deals with the tension between preserving cultural heritage and allowing exploration or development activities that might damage important sites. How does your country balance these competing interests? What examples can you share of successful heritage preservation or unfortunate losses of cultural sites? Share your thoughts in the comments. The scientific community's relationship with modern treasure hunters ranges from complete dismissal to cautious collaboration, depending on the specific individuals and circumstances involved. Some professional archaeologists work with responsible treasure hunters who follow proper protocols and share their discoveries with scientific institutions, while others maintain that any treasure hunting activity is inherently destructive to archaeological context and cultural heritage. The legal complications surrounding modern treasure hunting often involve complex disputes over ownership rights, international law, and cultural property protection that can take years to resolve through court systems. Treasure hunters who discover significant artifacts may find themselves involved in lengthy legal battles that consume more resources than the potential value of their discoveries, while also facing criminal charges for violations of cultural heritage protection laws. The technological arms race between treasure hunters and heritage protection agencies has led to increasingly sophisticated methods for both finding and protecting archaeological sites. Treasure hunters use satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and underwater robotics to locate potential sites, while government agencies employ similar technologies to monitor protected areas and detect unauthorized exploration activities. The educational potential of responsible treasure hunting activities has been recognized by some cultural institutions that work with experienced treasure hunters to conduct properly documented exploration that contributes to scientific knowledge while also satisfying adventure-seeking motivations. These collaborations must be carefully managed to ensure that educational benefits outweigh potential risks to cultural heritage sites. The international dimension of modern El Dorado treasure hunting involves complex relationships between multinational treasure hunting companies, national governments, indigenous communities, and international heritage protection organizations. These relationships are often complicated by differing legal systems, cultural values, and economic interests that make collaborative approaches difficult to develop and maintain. The media representation of modern treasure hunting significantly influences public attitudes toward these activities and can either support or undermine heritage protection efforts. Responsible media coverage can educate audiences about the importance of archaeological context and cultural sensitivity, while sensationalized portrayals may encourage destructive treasure hunting activities by glamorizing the search for hidden wealth. The enduring fascination with El Dorado represents far more than simple greed or adventure-seeking. It embodies fundamental aspects of human nature that transcend cultural boundaries and historical periods. Our eternal quest for meaning, transformation, and transcendence that drives us to pursue dreams that may be impossible but remain psychologically necessary. The legend has evolved from a specific indigenous ceremony to a universal metaphor for the human search for golden ages, perfect societies, and transformative experiences that promise to fulfill our deepest longings and resolve our most profound conflicts. The psychological appeal of El Dorado lies in its promise of complete transformation. The possibility that somewhere, somehow, there exists a place or experience that could fundamentally change our circumstances and resolve the limitations that constrain ordinary human existence. This transformative promise speaks to universal human experiences of dissatisfaction with present conditions and hope for radical improvement that characterizes individuals and societies across cultures and throughout history. The modern relevance of El Dorado extends far beyond treasure hunting to encompass contemporary searches for technological solutions, spiritual enlightenment, political transformation, and personal fulfillment that promise to deliver the same kind of radical change that golden cities represented to Spanish conquistadors. The legend serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of pursuing impossible dreams, while also acknowledging the essential human need for hope and aspiration that drives progress and creativity. The environmental lessons embedded in the El Dorado story have become increasingly relevant as contemporary societies grapple with the consequences of unlimited growth and resource exploitation that mirror the insatiable appetite for gold that drove historical treasure hunting expeditions. The Muisca understanding of gold as sacred material connected to cosmic harmony offers alternative perspectives on wealth and prosperity that challenge contemporary assumptions about economic development and environmental sustainability. The cultural preservation aspects of El Dorado research demonstrate how legends can serve as vehicles for maintaining connection to indigenous knowledge systems and traditional ways of understanding human relationships with natural environments. The scientific study of Muisca culture has contributed to broader recognition of indigenous intellectual achievements while also supporting contemporary indigenous communities in their efforts to maintain cultural identity and traditional practices. The educational applications of El Dorado's stories provide powerful tools for teaching about cultural diversity, historical change, and the importance of critical thinking in evaluating sources and claims about the past. The evolution of El Dorado from historical reality to impossible legend illustrates fundamental principles about how myths develop and spread, how cultural misunderstanding can create lasting misconceptions, and how different societies interpret and use stories to meet their own psychological and social needs. The technological dimensions of modern El Dorado research demonstrate how scientific methods can reveal truths about the past that were invisible to earlier generations while also creating new possibilities for understanding and preserving cultural heritage. Digital documentation, non-invasive archaeological techniques, and collaborative research methodologies offer models for how contemporary societies can study and learn from ancient cultures without damaging or exploiting their cultural legacy. The global significance of El Dorado as a cultural phenomenon reflects the universal human experiences that transcend specific historical contexts and cultural boundaries. Every society has developed stories about golden ages, perfect places, and transformative quests that serve similar psychological and social functions, suggesting that the appeal of El Dorado legends taps into fundamental aspects of human nature and social organization. Here's something that captures the universal nature of these golden dreams. From which country are you watching this? Because every culture in the world has stories about perfect places, golden ages, or transformative quests that promise to fulfill human longings for meaning and fulfillment. What examples can you think of from your cultural tradition that serve similar functions to El Dorado? How do these stories continue to influence contemporary dreams and aspirations? Share your reflections in the comments. The philosophical dimensions of El Dorado legends raise fundamental questions about the relationship between material wealth and spiritual fulfillment that remains central to contemporary debates about economic development, social justice, and environmental sustainability. The contrast between Spanish conquistador OBS, the philosophical dimensions of El Dorado legends raise fundamental questions about the relationship between material wealth and spiritual fulfillment that remains central to contemporary debates about economic development, social justice, and environmental sustainability. The contrast between Spanish conquistador obsessions with gold as economic commodity and Muisca understanding of gold as sacred material connected to cosmic harmony offers important insights into different ways of conceptualizing value and meaning. The artistic and literary legacy of El Dorado continues to inspire creative works that explore themes of quest, transformation, and the tension between dreams and reality that characterize human experience across cultures and historical periods. Contemporary artists, writers, and filmmakers draw upon El Dorado imagery and themes to create works that address modern concerns, while connecting to this ancient tradition of storytelling about human aspiration and limitation. The scientific legacy of El Dorado research has contributed to advances in archaeology, anthropology, environmental science, and cultural preservation that extend far beyond the specific study of Muisca culture and Colombian prehistory. The interdisciplinary methods developed for investigating El Dorado legends have provided models for studying other complex cultural phenomena that require integration of multiple types of evidence and collaboration between different academic disciplines. The continuing mystery of Lake Guatavita and other sites associated with El Dorado legends ensures that these stories will remain subjects of scientific investigation and popular fascination for generations to come. New technologies and methodologies may reveal additional insights about Muisca culture and pre-Columbian American civilizations, while also raising new questions about the relationships between human societies and natural environments that supported these remarkable achievements. The ultimate lesson of El Dorado may be that the most valuable treasures are not the gold and jewels that conquistadors sought, but the knowledge, wisdom, and cultural achievements of the indigenous peoples who created the original ceremonies that inspired these legendary quests. The real El Dorado lies not in hidden cities waiting to be discovered, but in our ability to understand, respect, and learn from the sophisticated cultural traditions that human societies have developed throughout history to create meaning, maintain social cohesion, and establish sustainable relationships with the natural world that supports all human life. As we emerge from the jungles and highlands of South America, having traced the incredible journey of El Dorado from sacred Muisca ceremony to global obsession, we carry with us insights that illuminate not just this specific legend, but fundamental truths about human nature, cultural misunderstanding, and the eternal tension between dreams and reality that shapes our individual and collective experience. We've discovered that the real El Dorado was never a city of gold, but a profound spiritual ceremony that demonstrated the sophisticated religious beliefs and artistic achievements of indigenous American peoples. We've seen how cultural misunderstanding transformed this sacred ritual into an impossible dream that drove men to madness and death while revealing the destructive power of unchecked greed and colonial exploitation. The story of El Dorado teaches us that the most dangerous legends are often those that contain just enough truth to seem possible, but promise rewards so extraordinary that they override rational judgment and ethical constraints. The Spanish conquistadors who pursued golden cities were driven by the same psychological forces that continue to motivate treasure hunters, get-rich-quick schemes, and utopian movements that promise radical transformation through the discovery of hidden knowledge or secret locations. Yet the legend also demonstrates the positive power of human aspiration and the essential role that dreams play in driving exploration, creativity, and cultural development. Without the hope for something better than present circumstances, human societies would lack the motivation necessary for progress and innovation. The challenge lies in maintaining the inspiration that comes from noble dreams while avoiding the destructive obsessions that arise when dreams become disconnected from reality and ethical responsibility. If you found this exploration of one of history's most enduring legends meaningful, make sure you're subscribed to History Unleashed and hit that notification bell, because we're committed to bringing you more deep investigations into the stories that have shaped human civilization and continue to influence our understanding of ourselves and our world. What aspects of the El Dorado story do you find most relevant to contemporary life? How do you think the lessons learned from this legendary quest can inform modern approaches to exploration, cultural preservation, and the pursuit of dreams that may seem impossible? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let me know what other historical mysteries or cultural legends you'd like us to investigate next. Remember, the most valuable